let's get into it. We're talking about one of the most important thinkers in human history, a guy who pretty much laid the groundwork for all of Western philosophy. But his story, it doesn't end with a medal. It ends with a death sentence. And the reason why is not only shocking, it's also, well, surprisingly relevant to our lives today.
So these are his last words. Pretty weird, right? A cryptic message about a rooster and the god of healing? It sounds totally random. But trust me, by the end of this, you'll know exactly what he meant. It was actually his final brilliant mic drop.
Let's paint the picture. You're in ancient Athens, the birthplace of democracy, this hub of civilization. But in the year 399 BCE, this city is about to execute one of its most famous citizens. And the weapon isn't a sword, it's a cup of poison.
And here is the absolute heart of the mystery. Yeah, the official charges were corrupting the youth and impiety, but what was that really about? How could a man whose only weapon was curiosity be seen as so dangerous that he had to be permanently silenced?
You know, to really understand the trial, you have to understand the man. And his entire journey as a philosopher, it all kicked off because of this one single startling statement that sent him on a quest to figure out what wisdom even is.
Now here's something that might blow your mind. For a man whose ideas literally changed the world, he never wrote any of them down. Not one book, not a single essay, nothing. So, how in the world do we know anything about him?
Well, we know him through the people who knew him. We see him through the eyes of his students. Mainly, his most famous student, Plato, a philosophical legend himself, and another student, Xenophon, who was a really sharp historian. They wrote down his conversations and basically saved his legacy for all of us.
See, Socrates wasn't some stuffy professor in an ivory tower. He didn't have a lecture hall. His classroom was the agora, the busy, chaotic marketplace of Athens. He'd just walk up and talk to anyone, politicians, poets, blacksmiths, right in the middle of their day.
And this is the moment where everything changes. The oracle at Delphi, think of it as the most trusted spiritual voice in the entire ancient world, makes this wild claim. Socrates himself was completely baffled by it. He was like, "Me? Wise? No way!" So he actually set out on a mission to prove the oracle wrong.
So he went all around Athens questioning people who had a reputation for being wise. And you know what he found? Under a little bit of pressure, their arguments completely fell apart. They didn't really know what they were talking about. And that's when it hit him. His wisdom wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being aware of how much he didn't know.
And this brings us to his most famous invention, his signature move, his intellectual weapon, if you will, the Socratic method. This is the very technique that made people either love him or really, really want him gone.
So, what is the Socratic method? Well, it's not about winning a debate. It's more like a shared journey to find the truth. It's a way of peeling back the layers of what you think you know just by asking questions until you get to what's real.
This is a perfect breakdown of how it works. You start with a simple idea, something everyone agrees on, like justice is telling the truth. Then you start poking at it. Okay, what if a killer asks you where your friend is hiding? Is it just to tell the truth then? And boom, this simple definition doesn't work anymore. That moment of confusion, that, whoa, maybe I don't know, that's where the real learning starts.
Okay, so now that we get his method, let's go back to that courtroom in Athens. Because when you've got a guy whose life's work is basically showing powerful people they don't know what they're talking about, well, you start to make some pretty powerful enemies.
And you have to remember the context here. Athens had just gone through this really traumatic political upheaval. A brutal dictatorship called the 30 Tyrants had just been kicked out, and democracy was back, but it was fragile. The whole city was on edge and really suspicious of anyone who seemed to be rocking the boat.
So yeah, the official charges were corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. But let's be real, the real crime was making important people look like fools in public. The real crime was teaching the next generation to question everything from the government to religion. And in a nervous, shaky democracy, that felt like a huge threat.
So when he's on trial for his life, Socrates doesn't grovel. He doesn't apologize. Instead, he doubles down. He defends his entire life's mission. This line from Plato's account of the trial just says it all. For Socrates, giving up the search for truth was a fate way worse than death.
And the jury found him guilty. But get this, even then, his friends had an escape plan all worked out. They were ready to bust him out. But Socrates said no. He argued that he'd lived his whole life under the laws of Athens, and to run away now would be a betrayal of everything he stood for.
And so he faced the end with this incredible sense of peace, turning his own death into one final,
Powerful lesson that would echo for thousands of years. Just imagine the scene. He's surrounded by his friends who are completely falling apart, and he just calmly drinks the poison. And as he feels the paralysis creeping up his body, what does he do? He does what he always did. He starts a philosophical debate, this time about whether the soul is immortal. Absolutely incredible.
And that brings us full circle, right back to those weird last words, "We owe a rooster to Asclepius." Asclepius was the god of healing. You'd sacrifice a rooster to him after you recovered from a sickness. Socrates wasn't being random. He was saying that death wasn't an end. For him, it was the cure from the sickness of being trapped in a physical body.
If there is one sentence that sums up everything Socrates stood for, this is it. For him, a life lived on autopilot, a life where you never stop to question your own beliefs, your own values, well, that's not really a human life at all. To be truly alive is to be self-aware.
And so his challenge lives on. His entire life was a monument to the power of asking why. So I guess I'll just leave you with this. In your own life, with your own beliefs, what's the one thing you've just accepted as true without ever really questioning?